Coming up on this week's episode of Search with Candour, I'll be talking all about how to get into technical SEO, even if you don't come from a technical background, with the one and only Beth Woodcock. Stay tuned for that. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers Ward, and I'm interviewing my good friend, Beth Woodcock this week. We're going to be talking all about how to get into technical SEO, even if you don't come from a technical background, which is something I've kind of done, and it's definitely something Beth has done. I think it's a really interesting conversation if you're looking to get into technical SEO or learn more about it. There's some brilliant resources and recommendations. Of course, links for everything in the show notes, as you come to expect if you've ever heard the podcast before. And Beth basically gives us a rundown of her career so far and some ideas of where to turn to if you want to learn more about technical SEO. And if maybe you're one of those more content-focused SEO people, maybe you're working in digital PR and you want to learn more about technical SEO, there are some brilliant resources out there. And essentially we're trying to say, it's not that scary. Dip your toes in. The water's fine. Come and check it out. Come and learn more about technical SEO. Stay tuned for that after a word from our sponsors. The first sponsor for this week's episode is AlsoAsked. You can go to AlsoAsked.com and check out this fantastic and unique intent research tool. As we probably already know, search intent is at the core of everything we do as SEOs. Even if you're not directly working in content, understanding what your users are trying to achieve through their searches is still pretty important. I think we can all agree. On top of this, Google has told us that it takes up to 9 searches for users to complete their goals. This can be a pretty hard picture to capture, to be honest, with traditional keyword research tools. So what if you could get hold of up-to-the-minute questions that users have asked that have been clustered by intent by Google themselves? Well, that's exactly what AlsoAsked actually does. AlsoAsked mines and organizes Google's People AlsoAsked data in real time, showing you the next most likely question your searchers are going to ask. Best of all, it's completely free. You don't even need to create an account to try out AlsoAsked. Of course, if you do find it useful, there are paid options as well. We have the free, we have the light, and we have the pro options in terms of accounts that you can subscribe to. At the touch of a button from these accounts, you can download not only the questions people are asking, but also the answers Google has selected, the website URLs, and the titles that are ranking for those answers as well. AlsoAsked has the world's only API for People AlsoAsked data, meaning you can combine this data you're pulling from whatever questions you're asking directly into tools. You can combine it with things like ChatGPT to really supercharge your content briefs and transform the way you write content at scale. Go to AlsoAsked.com and check out this fantastic intent research tool today. This week's sponsor is Optmyzr, the PPC management software that is built for PPC people. Optmyzr contains everything you need to create, optimize, and justify high-performing PPC campaigns. You'll never have to worry about security again. You'll never have to worry about setting up complex data sharing between apps or juggling multiple invoices. With their dashboard, you get a high-level overview of any ad account connected to Optmyzr. You can quickly see key metrics, recommended actions, and how to set up the next campaign all in one place. The Rule Builder uses easy drag and drop conditions to automatically take action when you need them to. And this is a real experience from my previous role where we had an ad that ran throughout the holiday period when it shouldn't have been, and I think it spent nearly 6 times its recommended budget by accident. If I had an Optmyzr at that time, it would have paused the campaign automatically when it hit its budget, and we would have saved a lot of trouble and a lot of money for our client. You also get automated alerts for things such as KPI metrics and budgets in general. Optmyzr monitors what you specify and delivers alerts to you so you can intervene as needed. Optmyzr also integrates with other apps such as Slack, Teams, and Zapier, so if you need to get alerts where you need them, you can do that by integrating Optmyzr with those tools as well. The Optmyzr team includes world-renowned experts such as CEO Fred Valles, product evangelist Nava Hopkins, and of course the PPC puppy HK. Now, we've spoken about this topic on the podcast before, so you probably already know that ad platforms are pretty much driven by profit motive and benefit when you spend more, even if it's not in your best interest to do so, and it's on lower value traffic. advertisers need to put their interests and those of their brands and clients first. So the idea of PPC insurance is taking out a policy, essentially by using software like Optmyzr, that covers you when things go south. With everything you need for audits and reporting, Optmyzr is the all-in-one PPC toolkit that makes managing paid search easier, faster, and less prone to error. To start your 2-week free trial, click the link in the show notes or the video description down below, or go to optmyzr.com. That's a 2-week free trial by clicking the link in our show notes or in the video description down below if you're watching on YouTube. My guest for this week is a senior technical SEO executive, an upcoming Brighton SEO speaker coming up in April 2024, has also been part of the Women in Tech SEO mentorship program, as well as an overall ray of sunshine, as she was dubbed back in Brighton SEO. Welcome to the show, Beth Woodcock.
Hi, Jack. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Glad to be here.
But glad to have you on as well, mate. I know we talked about it all the way back in Brighton. We were chatting a little bit and getting ideas and planning some seeds and all that kind of stuff for what we could be doing.
Absolutely.
And I love the topic you brought on. I know we had a quick discussion about the kind of a few different topics and stuff like that. And we're going to kind of touch on your upcoming talk of Brighton SEO as well. We won't spoil that, listeners and viewers. Don't worry. You can still go and see Beth in Brighton. But we will kind of touch on a few little bits and pieces. And we're going to kind of kick things off because the topic is how to get into technical SEO if you're not from a technical background. And I'm not from a technical background. And by the sounds of it, I'm guessing you're not either, Beth. So let's kick things off, I guess, with how you got into SEO and technical SEO in general.
Yeah. So I think this is similar for a lot of SEOs. SEO wasn't something that I dreamed of as a child. Is
there an SEO out there that just like, I want to be either an astronaut or an SEO, like growing up? Is there like a younger generation of like, I don't know.
Possibly. I mean, I was speaking to some marketing students the other day who are in marketing in university, and they were saying they want to get into SEO, which is like crazy.
Cool.
Like a couple of years ago, like unheard of, but now people are actually wanting to get into SEO. Anyway, as a child, I didn't want to go into SEO. I wanted to be a vet or an author or something like that, one of the big careers. I fell into this role after doing graphic design at university. So I did it in college, I did it in university. Thought it was really fun, liked Photoshop, things like that. But I kind of looked around and I didn't think my standard of work was like as good as other people's. And I don't know, I didn't feel like I liked it as much. When I was at university, this COVID happened.
Oh, God. Yeah.
I ended up getting really involved with my students' union. I was basically elected as an officer and worked there for 2 years. So what happened was I took my graphic design skills and I started to get more into marketing and marketing the students' union because there was no students on campus. So we had to get what the students' union was doing out there somehow. So I was doing a lot of social media assets. I also had a society at the time, which I was promoting. So after those 2 years working in the students' union, my final year, I was supposed to go back to university and do my final year. That was supposed to be a COVID teaching year. So like the first year, which like we're teaching in COVID, all online. For some courses, that's okay. But for graphic design, I was just a bit like, what's the quality of value here? So I thought, I don't really want to go back to university if I can help it. Thankfully, because I built up a portfolio of marketing work, I landed my first job in a really small marketing agency in Huddersfield. I think there was about 8 people there at the time. And this was for a marketing and SEO role.
Right.
So I was applying to loads of marketing jobs, like marketing. And this one said marketing and SEO. And I was like, well, I know what marketing is because I've been doing it for a couple of years. SEO, no idea. I remember when I was working in the Students' Union asking the marketing manager at the time, like, what's SEO? Like, do you know what that is? And she was just like, I don't really know what it is. So I was like, I'll figure it out, right? I figured out marketing, I can figure out SEO. I was really open with them about this. I was just like, I don't really know SEO, but they said, we really like what you've been doing, so we would like to give you a chance. I was really lucky that my first marketing manager was really great. He took me under his wing. he taught me the basics of like keyword research, crawling, indexing, the basic stuff that you get involved with when you're just learning about SEO. Opened up a whole new world for me. I only ended up working at this company for 6 months because I kind of feel like I outgrew the role. A lot of the clients that we were getting at the time were people like your local plumber or a little tiny shop down the road or something like that.
We
And I
still
kind
get
of,
those calls at our agency sometimes. I was in the office the other day and had a lovely chat with this guy, and he was like, "Oh yeah, it's me and my dad like running this hotel." I was like, "Are they a chain hotel? Like this is a weird call to get like the owner of a hotel chain calling." I realized it was a local one, like here in Norfolk, like 10 miles outside of Norwich. And I was like, "Oh yeah, you probably want to work with a freelancer or something, or a much smaller agency." But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I had a similar experience where my first kind of agency stuff was all tiny local clients and local stuff as well. And yeah, similar kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great for when you're starting out, but I think I wanted to move on to much bigger clients and bigger issues. I was seeing a lot of like the same stuff, and because it was quite a small agency, we were quite limited with what we could do. So I basically ended up landing another SEO role where the clients were more household names. I was really like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm working on these websites. Absolutely nuts. I was given tasks that were a lot more demanding, both technically and strategically. I was working like a dual role at the time. And I really felt like I just got the technical stuff better. It just worked. It was a bit more like, if this isn't on a website, that's a problem and needs to be involved. But with the keyword research stuff, it was more about like predicting the future and predicting trends and things like that. So I kind of like the more tick box strategy, I think. So I did a lot of work over a year for this agency, and then I asked to be put in just a technical role because they were looking for someone who was more technically inclined at the time. And yeah, I hadn't had any sort of like coding experience or anything like that, but I think that introduction itself was like, oh my goodness, like I actually prefer this side and I didn't expect to prefer that side. I thought I was quite technical. I thought I was quite creative because I was like graphic design, but actually it turned out that I really liked the technical side.
It's a really kind of common path there, I think. Like a lot of us accidentally end up in SEO. I know I certainly did. And speaking to guests before, like talking to Hannah Butcher a few weeks ago about the squiggly career paths is how Hannah put it, of like how you end up doing one thing and you don't really know what you're going to like until you try it. And you saying they're like realizing, oh, actual technical SEO is the stuff that really kind of gets my brain going and really interests me and engages me and all that kind of stuff. I think that is so common for a lot of us to start off very broad, like you said, even with just our marketing role, and then realize like, oh, maybe SEO is the thing I like. And then you go from there. And then within that, you even kind of like niche down even further, right? And work out, oh, I'm a content guy, I'm a technical person, I'm a this, I'm a that. And you kind of, and some people niche down even further than that and have like super duper, I am the world's best, this individual skill or whatever. But I think that's a really cool kind of way to do it, especially like yourself coming fresh out of university and stuff. Like, I know it's the typical thing, but like you could basically do anything, right? Like, and so many people, again, I mentioned to you just before we started recording, I have a physics degree, nothing to do with marketing, nothing to do with SEO, nothing to do with podcasting, like nothing at all. And I ended up accidentally doing a marketing job for a student accommodation, funny enough, similar to you mentioning student union stuff. I started out in student stuff as well. And by the end of like a few years, or like 4 or 5 years in that role, they were like, oh, we need a new website. And I was like, cool, I'll give that a go. And then built them a website in WordPress without having any idea what I was doing. And nearly 6 years later, here I am as an SEO. It's like similar weird kind of paths of like, I didn't intend for this to happen, but here I am kind of thing.
Yeah, that's literally absolutely it. Like I do some talks for students sometimes about my career and how I got into it. And I do like, I really try to get across, you need to be trying lots of different things and you need to be getting some sort of real life experience and, volunteering and getting involved. And because I think sometimes the attitude is, oh, well, I'm doing a marketing degree, so I'm going to go into marketing and, someone's going to hand me a job. And it doesn't really work like that. Like you really have to show your niche, your speciality. You have to show that you're actively interested in the industry. And that's what was happening. Like, I was in this new role and I was finding I was learning everything I could. I was cramming it all into my brain. I was doing all these audits. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be like a top technical SEO. Then I would send the audits to the client and then I'd hear nothing.
Oh, that's
So
always terrifying.
yeah, so what I was finding as a technical SEO is like my hard work I'd spent so long, and I was like, wow, I know everything. It had to be passed through multiple layers and it never saw the finish line. So, as a fresh SEO, I couldn't comprehend this. And I could start to see a gap between the work that I was producing and the product that I was trying to sell. So, I ended up getting a bit burnt out, being a bit like, I don't know if I can continue with this SEO for any longer. I was following the process that I was told to follow, but it just wasn't working. And then what happened was I ended up moving from my university town back to my hometown. And I was offered a role in another agency, much more technical focus, like very technical. And that's where I am today. So I have more of a say in our technical SEO strategy. And it's become clearer to me the importance of having that client relationship and the communication in the way that the client understands. So I feel, to me, it's become a bit of a mission to like demystify SEO.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really
Yeah.
like common thing for a lot of us when you really get interested in a thing, and then that moment where you have to send it off to a client or communicate to a client. And as we were saying earlier, working with much smaller clients, you often get a person who has never even heard of SEO, and then you're speaking to the marketing manager, maybe the boss like signed the contract or whatever, and they have no idea what's going on. They don't even know what like website CMS it's built on or anything like that. They have no idea what's going on, and then suddenly they have all this stuff like, by the way, you need to minify your JavaScript. I'm like, what does that mean?
What?
I have unminified JavaScript. What does that mean? Like, what's a core web vital? All this kind of stuff. And I think that's such an important skill to either work in a team with. I know a lot of agencies, including us here at Canada, have people like account managers and stuff who are brilliant at translating all this stuff. And it's something like I've found myself, especially through my previous agency, of being able to communicate that. So sit down on a call with a client and run through a technical audit and make it digestible of like, why does this matter? How does this work? Who actually needs to do the thing? What's the priority here? Instead of just like, here's a million things, fix them all and your website will be great. Like, what's actually going to take time? What do we need to get developers? Are they internal developers, external developers? So many different variables going on when it comes to technical stuff, especially as you said, when you're working on a massive, massive site. And in the client side of things, it then needs to go through, oh yeah, before we do anything, it needs to go through the management and then senior management and then the C-suite people and then the legal department. It's like, oh God, okay, right, okay. All these hoops to jump, all these legal boxes to tick before anything gets changed. And you're totally right, Beth. I've had that before where you send off an audit and 9 months later, like, so how's it going? Has anything happened?
Yeah.
Like, no, it's still with the CEO still looking at it. Like, it's been 9 months. Like, what's he been doing? Like, oh, he's been running the business and doing loads of other stuff and isn't too worried about the fact that the core web vitals are in the toilet or whatever. Like, that's not the priority of a CEO, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting thing to kind of open up the rest of the discussion, because coming from different backgrounds, I think helps us see that technical stuff in different ways. Like, I come from more of a
Absolutely.
writing kind of background. I was you can probably listen and see comic books and stuff behind me. I was a comic book writer and stuff. I was doing blogs and reviews and writing comic books and stuff, and stumbled into a marketing job because I can kind of do words a bit. And you coming from a
Yeah.
design background, Beth, I think is a really common kind of like balance there. You mentioned creative and analytical, like the logical creative balance there, I think is a hugely important part of shifting that perspective and being able to translate it and stuff like that as well. I find that stuff
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in technical communities in general, there is this temptation to be, I'm so clever. I know all the tech stuff. I'm so nerdy. I know so much about technical SEO. I've been in the industry for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I know Python. I can write a script to crawl a website. I've just built a tool. And to me, to that I say, so what? Like, what does that mean? I know, like, being clever and being able to do stuff and just knowing stuff about SEO or tech SEO, that in itself doesn't solve your clients' problems. You have to be able to translate technical priorities into value.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like the missing link that I see with audits from some agencies.
Yeah, definitely. I know we've had this conversation with clients before where literally the only thing they want to know is like, how much money is a website making us? It's like, okay, fine. You know that's priority. In general, and that's not a bad thing. I said that fairly with a negative tone, but I don't mean that as a negative. At the end of the day, your website is there to make you money. It's there to spread your word, grow your brand, whatever it is. At the end of the day, you're going to have to make money from this to pay for the agency work, to pay for the freelancer, whoever's doing the work for you. And I think there's an element there of like, if this carries on or this gets worse or these pages aren't able to get indexed, you have put, £10,000 or £100,000, whatever it is, into nothing. And that is just throwing that money away out of the window. Or the other side of it where like, oh, by the way, your checkout system doesn't work. You are losing £10,000 worth of customers every single day, and you will continue to do that until you fix the things. Like, oh god, that's priority then. Oh no, yeah, we're
Yeah,
making less money, or we're
exactly.
losing customers, like, or even losing brand, face. That can be an important factor in there as well. Like communicating that and understanding what the business's priorities are. Again, whether that's revenue or brand or whatever it is, I think is a hugely important thing to kind of have in that almost onboarding process and onboarding phase. I know, again, we do this at Canada. We've gotten good at this, if I do say so ourselves, of having this initial conversation of like, what is the goal for the next, what would you like out of the next 12 months of working with us? So what's the process here? Do you want to focus on this? Do you want to focus on that? Is it you need to make more money? Do you need to just bring more traffic? Like, what's the plan here? And setting that as kind of the goal over the next whatever time limit you set. And I think that's a really important way to establish those boundaries and be able to then have that touchstone of what to translate it. Okay, this client cares about making money. They're an e-commerce business. Everything needs to be, if this doesn't work, this is how much less money you will make or money you will lose or whatever it is, or customers you will lose. Or if it's a big brand and they're just looking to grow their brand, then, oh, this is how your competitors are outdoing you. And, well, they've got this thing on their website, or they've fixed this problem. They've changed the way, they've remapped their site and whatever it is. They're outdoing you and being seen more. And look at these like visibility graphs or check SERPs or whatever. There's so many ways of understanding that and selling that and understanding their perspective to bring it to them as well, right?
Yeah, and that is true. I think also what people need to do, especially if they're working in technical SEO, is bring like a peer review process into your work.
Yep.
So when I do an audit, what used to happen was I did an audit, which I might get help from a senior technical SEO, and then I'd get my technical SEO manager to approve it, and then it gets sent off to the client. What happens now is I get people involved who aren't technical. So like an account manager, they should be knowing what's happening in technical SEO audits. Maybe someone in strategy, but I think it's more effective if it's an account manager who can oversee the whole sort of the whole product that you're offering to the client, especially if you're trying to sell them like PPC. We do media as well. And what has been really good is when you bring them on board to question your process and question like, okay, well, what does that say? What do you want the client to actually do? And they can also also have more of an understanding of money as well, in the fact that like a technical SEO, like you kind of do have a bit of an understanding of value, but you don't really know what PPC are doing. You don't really know what those people are doing, and I think it's still there's still a bit of a bias towards PPC. I think people don't quite understand the value of SEO. And it's really important to see if like what you're doing will clash with what they're doing. And if you try and explain what you want the client to do to someone who isn't technical, they can turn around and say, actually, well, the person who's going to be making this change is the marketing manager and they won't understand what you're trying to do. So, your work might be actioned by a developer maybe, but generally, like you said, there's more bureaucracy than that. You have to persuade someone in marketing or even someone in finance that your proposals are worth spending time and money on. So you have to make that really clear, or else that needle will not budge.
So I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. You mentioned auditing and stuff, right? I think that is a big part of technical SEO, but there are a lot of different ways to do that. So what are kind of like some of the initial tools you think, the ones you started off with and the ones you would recommend now, years down the line in your career? Like if you're having a conversation with a student and they're saying like, oh, what are the things I need to do to dip my toes into a technical SEO?
Yeah. So maybe a little bit controversial.
Uh-oh.
But I feel that if all paid tools were shut down tomorrow, I'd still be able to do my job.
Okay.
And
yeah,
I think that's a position that anyone should be in when it comes to their daily workload. Your agency, you might have a tool for a bit and then might stop paying for it. You might be paying for a certain subscription and then things that you use might go onto a premium plan. Google Search Console also changes all the time. There's tools that are added and get taken away. But having less of a reliance on tools and learning more about how stuff works at its core is more useful, I feel.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's
however,
a transferable tool, right? Like when you get that,
yeah,
like you said, when you lose access, you move from one agency to another, or the
exactly.
plan changes, as has been happening with some of the bigger like all-in-one suite kind of tools that have changed over the last few months. You get that element of like, oh, I can no longer do this thing with this tool. So how does that work again? And having a transferable skill that you're absolutely spot on. Like, I think having that core idea of, well, I know I need to get to the indexing report and understand which pages are indexed and which aren't, and understand the status codes. Like, okay, there are a bunch of different ways of doing that. You can use various different crawlers. You can go into your index report in Search Console. There are free versions of crawlers you can use instead of the paid one you're using. All this kind of stuff. That's a really, really good way of looking at it. And I think that kind of ties into the bigger topic, right, of having that other background also brings transferable skills. Like you coming from a design background probably means you look at a website and understand technical SEO in a different way to me, who cannot draw a stick man to save my life.
Yeah, I mean, like if you look at like there's a lot of tools out there, but a lot of them contain things like fake metrics, like spam scores and like hyperrank or whatever. It doesn't tell anybody solid data. It's just like waffle or like the products that they want to sell. So what I would do is I would encourage people to dive into the inspect tab on Chrome, learn about the network tab, the console section, comparing the inspect tab, which is the JavaScript rendered version, to the page source, which is a HTML. So just get used to like seeing the skeleton of a site and identifying features. So you get a lot quicker at identifying stuff that matters, and then you won't need a tool to do it for you. I mean, tools can make it faster, of course, and some tools will show you things in nice bright colors and lovely and digestible. But you got to think like, this time next year, maybe that tool might have changed to the point where it's not accessible to you anymore. So it's really important to absolutely just understand how to do your job at its core and what specifically are you trying to achieve, instead of just getting a tool and pumping out a report that it tells you to pump out and sending that to the client.
Oh, white labeling reports is the red flag of all agencies. I see that so often where we will have a discussion with the client and they'll be like, "Oh, we've already had an audit done by an agency," and we'll get it through, and it's like, "Oh, it's a SEMrush, it's an Ahrefs,
Yeah.
it's a whatever," and they've just put the logo at the top there. I was like, I recognize all of these formats. There was one the other day, we were having a conversation with the client and we were trying to work out what it was. It was going through. I was like, hold on a minute. That's using Moz language, and I just went and checked. It's like they've just white labeled a Moz report, and they'd completely, to their credit, I guess, sort of, not really. They had completely redesigned it, put their whole branding on it, all that kind of stuff. But all the graphs and stuff were clearly just screenshots from a Moz report, and they had just screenshot them. Like, you cheeky buggers, like coming in and just saying, yeah, we've run a full crawl of the site and it's all fine and blah blah blah. I'm like, I don't believe you. And I had a similar kind of thing where you were just saying there, like having that fundamental moment of, I remember the first time, I can't remember if I did it on purpose or by accident, where I did view source and I was like, oh, HTML, I can see the matrix, like, oh my god, this is amazing. I'm inside the internet, this is amazing. And that is like the tip of the iceberg of the tip of the iceberg kind of thing. And I thought I'd like unlocked the power of the internet and I could just take over the world now and just rewrite HTML to my heart's content, and then learned the inspect of the thing. I was like, oh, okay, no, I'm still a baby swimming in these waters. I don't know what I'm doing. But I love that, like simple things like looking in your browser. That's something I talked about with Alex Harford as well. Like having those really fundamental understandings of how websites work, not a particular website, but websites in general, and understanding how your browser renders stuff, how stuff is queued from Google side compared to Bing, compared to other browsers. Like those little things can change, and having a fundamental basic understanding of like the core of it all, I think is hugely important to then build upon. And as you were saying there, you can then transfer those things to, oh, now I'm looking at this website and I understand, you know, this is built on WordPress and this is built on Wix and this is built on Squarespace, and they're all completely different, but the fundamentals are still there, and you can still translate that and understand from client to client and site to site, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're wanting to get into technical SEO specifically, it's really important to know how the internet works and how computers work. So I'd recommend, there's a completely free open source course. It's called the Odin Project. I recommend this to anybody doing anything on a computer. So how it starts,
that's you listeners, that's like, you viewers, you're on a computer right now.
It starts by going through like, how does a computer actually work? Takes you through the command line. What's a command line? Oh my goodness. You really do dive in headfirst with this, but that's where you want to be if you want to be learning technical SEO. Once you understand those core concepts, and it's really good at explaining it, it has like really the best resources that it can find. Things like indexing and crawling become a lot easier to wrap your head around. I also have a couple of book recommendations.
Oh, yeah, please. We don't often get book recommendations on the show. That's exciting. Listeners and viewers, I'll put a link for the Odin Project in the show notes. So go and check out the Odin Project. It will be linked show description, video description, wherever you're experiencing the podcast.
Great. Both these books, they don't have anything to do with technical SEO specifically.
Okay.
More to do with your mindset, and they've really helped me with my career. So the first one is called So Good They Can't Ignore You. Why Skills Trump Passion in the Quest for Work You Love.
Nice.
So the reason that I love this book so much, it turns the idea of you should work in something you're passionate about basically on its head. It says you shouldn't work in something you're passionate about. What? He actually argues that you should first find a career that there's a skills gap in, and you should learn everything you can about that topic, because then you become a professional. So I was particularly drawn to technical SEO because I'd heard about the skills gap in tech. So what's actually happening is, I think a lot of people have heard of the skills gap, but what's actually happening is we're having a skills regression when it comes to digital. So if you kind of think about how kids use the internet these days, on the phone, on the apps, whatever. But
you've never sounded older than that, Matt. I know you're a lot younger than me, but kids these days using the internet on the app.
I know, I sound so old, but It's a serious issue, and I actually believe it's going to be an issue soon. Kids know how to use phones, but they struggle when it comes to using computers. And teachers who write online say that they can't do things like opening files. They don't know what a program is. They have to call programs apps because that's how they kind of understand it. It's kind of, I wonder, like, when these kids get into the workplace and when they have to use, like, I don't know, keyboard and mouse, like, how's that going to work? So I find it so interesting that our technology is progressing. Like, we have all this AI stuff that's happening and that's progressing so quickly, but our next generation don't have the skills to be able to cope with that. And there's like this kind of clash that's happening.
There's a whole generational thing, isn't there? Yeah, like I know.
Yeah.
I've always, even before this conversation was happening, and this is not me being like, "Oh, well, aren't I so clever?" But I'll be 34 this year. I was born in 1990, so I remember years before the internet. I didn't always have a phone, let alone a smartphone. I remember when we got our first computer, and I know to some listeners of you out there that makes me sound like the oldest person in the world, but there was that moment when I realized, because I have nieces and nephews who are, 10, 11 years old, like they have always existed with smartphones. They are born like post iPhone release. So
Yeah.
the web has always been accessible to them. And my niece just got a phone for the first time the other day as a 12-year-old. And I was like, I think I got mine at like 14 or 15 or something. I was in high school or whatever it was. And having that realization of, and this is not a dig on parents. I think there was totally valid reasons for this, like giving iPad use for kids and all this kind of stuff, right? And then exactly as you were saying there, Beth, this weird kind of like journey. I think the sensational headlines were like, Zoomers are just as bad as boomers or some, because every generation has to be fighting another generation for some reason. But what the actual thing was talking about was that we've all kind of gotten used to how the internet works and just take everything for granted now. And I had to learn stuff from scratch. And again, the generations before me, I know Mark and plenty of other guests on the show who are older than me have talked about having to actually build your own website from scratch in HTML because CMSs didn't exist, like that kind of level of stuff. And then having an element of like, oh no, I just have the internet. What's the joke is like the save icon, for example. If you're on a computer, viewers and listeners, Beth, if you're on a computer there, you see the little floppy disk, right? Like most people, I barely remember floppy disks. I remember playing games on my Amiga via floppy disk many, like 25 years ago, whatever it was. But I haven't seen a floppy disk in probably 25 years, this side of this century. So this millennia, in fact, like it's mad to like think that little things like that seem obvious and seem like, whatever, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know what a floppy disk is. You don't need to know that a save icon is based on a floppy disk or all this kind of stuff. But that paints that bigger picture of what's a server? How do servers work? What is your computer doing to get to the internet? And this was me coming from my science background as well. So I have a very logical, very analytical mind. I'm exactly like you, Beth. I'm a problem solver. I want to know how stuff works and I want to solve that problem. I want to understand why it worked and why it didn't work and all that kind of stuff. And coming from my science background, like trying to get my head around the fact that, the internet is just cables under the sea. I'm like, what? Like, yeah. All the internet. Someone at some point laid a cable through, like, under the Atlantic Ocean, and that's how the UK and US talk to each other via phones. And it's basically the same for the internet now, 100, 200 years later. It's crazy how sort of like the fundamentals kind of haven't changed. And I know this has been a big, seemingly common theme for this season, pretty much. Everyone I have a conversation with is like, yeah, the fundamentals are kind of the same. Like SEO hasn't really changed that much. The internet hasn't changed that much as everything has completely changed around us. And as much as we are perpetually online these days in many ways, you're totally right that like understanding those fundamentals, I think, is really important for the younger generation. Again, me talking as the older statesman on the podcast here. And it will be an interesting kind of like look at people's careers when the current sort of like 10, 12, 13-year-olds go into work at the age of 18 or post-university, whatever they end up doing, and what that digital skills gap is like. I'm fascinated to see what it's going to be like. Who are the next wave of developers or, tech SEO people or whatever it is?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is so interesting. Um, I think now more than ever, it's important to have those computer skills, internet skills, and not just generic digital skills because of that gap that's happening. Because we're still building websites, we're still building software on computers, and until we can build them on mobiles, there is just going to have this gap in this tech regression. And also, it's important to recognize that and make sure that you are one of the people that has those skills to be so that you're the employable one. Because those skills are becoming more and more valuable as less and less people possess them. You mentioned about how obviously the floppy disk and how floppy disks are seen differently to different generations of people. That brings me nicely onto my second book.
You're welcome. There's a segue.
So this second book, I haven't actually read it all the way through. I only read about 100 pages, but it inspired me so much that I wanted to speak about it. So this was given to me when I joined the company that I'm at now. It's called Rebel Ideas. So it basically emphasizes how important it is to have people who think differently around you. It has a lot of situations where there was a lot of kind of same type of people in a room and things have gone wrong because if they had brought someone in who's from a different background, they would have picked up on problems that were happening in the company and would have been able to stop them. So going back to attitude and what people should be learning technical SEO, it's really important not to get carried away with just cramming your brain with technical concepts, when ultimately at the end of the day, you have to think about the audience that you're trying to sell those concepts to. So that's why I make a point of getting people outside of technical SEO, outside of the technical SEO team, involved in technical SEO work. Because I can get carried away thinking, oh yeah, I know what this works. I know what a hreflang is. I know this JavaScript is wrong. Schema, whatever, buzzwords, whatever. Other people can be brought in, challenge me and be like, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything to a client. Hey, I'm not really sure what the client should be doing here. What we tried to say to them, what we tried to sell them. What's the outcome? What's the value? And to me, it might be obvious, but to someone looking in, the people who are actually doing the work, it's not going to be as obvious to them. So it's really important that we're in tech SEO specifically, we're not in this echo chamber of tech. And at the end of the day, we're trying to get our clients results. We're not just trying to look clever because it's like, oh, I'm so technical and I know technical things. We're actually trying to get our clients to do stuff. And what is that stuff that you're trying to get them to do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. I've been recommended Rebel Ideas multiple times. I think you've finally pushed me over the edge to actually go and check it out. I think a couple of guests have even recommended it before. It's been I think a lot of people said have inspired them, like you said, to bring that diversity of thought in there. And I know diversity is a blah 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 loaded topic, but be realistic about it. There is an element that we need to understand of whether that's the generational thing we were talking about, whether it's a cultural thing, whether it's just a different skill set of, like we said, bringing in the design team or the account managers or whoever it is. It doesn't have to be a big deal, for want of a better phrase. You can make that be, like you were saying, Beth, make that a part of your process, right? Integrate it into your team's processes. Understand that actually who would benefit from this and how other people that aren't necessarily the most technical in the team can contribute as well. And I know I found this where I've been brought on to, again, I'm not the most technical member of our team by far. I'm brought on to a thing to review a thing, and I will spot something in a different way or something they missed because, like you said, you can certainly get focused and drill down into oh, I've worked out all these little, super technical little bits, but didn't realize that, and this was something I was guilty of. I'm calling out myself here. The page titles were just wrong, and I was like, oh yeah, No, that's a good point. There was a site migration that was going on, and I'd gotten so focused on all the technical stuff, and I'd gone through and worked out like, this is broken. You mentioned hreflangs. There was a ton of hreflang issues and stuff. I went through and sorted all this stuff out, and my colleague came over and was like, all the page titles are just the brand name, right? I was like, oh no, I didn't even notice that. I was so like head down in my
Yeah.
zone of like technical stuff. I hadn't even occurred to me to even look at the page titles. Like, I really should start from the fundamentals, exactly as we were saying earlier. Like, that was such a learning process for me of, just because you're doing a tech audit doesn't mean you can't bring in the other elements. And I think so much of stuff, like, we talk about this a lot, where UX and design and stuff actually brings in a lot of the elements of SEO and tech SEO and customer retention, all this kind of stuff. I know we like to kind of separate it all, and I'm an SEO, I'm a developer, I'm a UX designer, whatever. So much of that stuff crosses over. I know there's a big discussion of SXO, so search experience optimization, of understanding and like blending the two together and having that process of, like, I mentioned a checkout thing earlier. Like, if your checkout process doesn't work, your checkout button doesn't work, sure, that's a technical SEO thing, but a crawler doesn't necessarily pick that up. If it's just not a button at all, then there's nothing to crawl, right? If you're just using Screaming Frog or Sitebulb or, on crawl or whatever you're using, you wouldn't even pick that up. You actually need to go in and click around and play with the site and do that manual test phase that I know maybe my favorite bit. I don't know if that's a bad thing to say.
Yeah, I used to be quite similar. Is like, I used to want to dive into these tools and do a crawl and see what Screaming Frog says, but I think sometimes it's just about literally just going onto the website and what does a person see, trying to search for the website and trying to see what comes up when you keyword research and things like that. And I used to be the type of person that was like, I'm just a technical SEO and that's all I know and that's all I want to cram my brain with. More and more, I'm seeing the intersection between, technical strategy, content, UX. My talk at Brighton SEO is good segue. My talk at Brighton SEO is actually not aimed at technical people. It's aimed at people who write content or SEO strategists, people who just do anything with any URLs on a site, because I want to get more people who aren't technical to understand log files and utilize log files, because they will be able to see results that maybe might not be shown on Google Search Console.
Yeah, I think that the log file analysis thing is, I know that's probably a phrase a lot of viewers and listeners are familiar with. I wonder what percentage of them have actually gone in and checked log files, or actually asked the developers and been like, hey, hosting company, can I have my server log files, please? And actually dive into that. I have done it once in my agency career so far. Again, other people in my team are doing that. I'm not saying we don't do that, but that has not been my role. And I kind of had that discussion. I know I attended Stephen Van Vessen from Content King and having a conversation with him about, he did a talk about log file, and he made that joke of like, hey, and how many you out there have actually got access to your log files right now? Do you know how to access them? And there was one guy who heckled Steve, be like, it's easy, don't worry about it. It's like, yeah, maybe for you, but like, that's not the rest of us. And I love the idea of your talk being pitched to the people who have maybe heard that phrase in passing. They're attending Brighton SEO. That's the kind of conversations, you're in the right place to kind of hear that conversation, right? You might hear a talk or walk past somebody saying like, blah, 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 log file analysis. And then, what does that even mean? What is a server log? How does that work? And I love the idea of making it more accessible for more people, because coming back around to what we were just talking about with the diversity of ideas and stuff, people will see them in different ways, and you can use them in different ways and understand why they're important, why you need to know who and what and where is crawling your site and how it all works. Coming back around to the fundamental understanding of how servers work and how your website is understood by servers and the internet and crawlers, etc., etc., etc. This all builds on the same thing, right? And I really like the idea of having that element of opening, like, what's the opposite of Pandora's box? Like a treasure chest, essentially. Like, oh my, somebody will walk out of your talk and be like, oh my God, I had no idea I could do this thing. I can't wait to go back and try this new thing or do this differently, or, speak with my team who do this stuff, and now I can get involved in that process. And hopefully, if you're attending Brighton SEO, viewers and listeners, go and check out Beth's talk and get inspired for log file analysis and stuff, because it doesn't sound like the sexiest thing in the world, but I think it can be really interesting.
I think it's sexy.
There you go. Official endorsement. That's the title of the podcast, is Log File Analysis is Sexy, says Beth Woodcock.
I need to change it quick. I think I'm really hoping that's the reaction that I'll get to people walking out of my log file analysis presentation. When I started off in technical SEO, I heard about log file analysis and I saw it, and I remember I asked my SEO manager at the time, I was like, what is log file analysis? And they were like, oh, it's you don't really need to worry about that, like it's just difficult, it's really techie stuff. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then in my new company, it was something that's like quite heavily pushed, and it's like log file analysis is something that we really want to do regularly because we believe it's important. And I was like, what? Like, where I worked previously, they said it doesn't matter. And so I think it is. It sounds scary, and I think it looks scary. And having to contact the developers, it's all very scary. But I don't think it should be scary because it's so useful. And I mean, all that log files are they're just footprints on your site. So if you imagine like a big pot of snow, and then a little robot walking across it, and those footprints are basically what log files are. So you have a visual way of seeing bots that have been on your site and where they've been. It's like, why does this matter? Like, why do I need to care about where Google has been on my site? Well, if there's certain pages on your website that Google isn't visiting, why isn't Google visiting them? It could be a speed issue. It could be an issue with your theme. I have seen sites that have like 50,000 plugins, and Google's just like, yeah, no, that's not happening.
I had a WordPress client that had 65 active plugins at once, and I just wanted to scream, because there is so much room for error in there. And you're totally right, like simple little things like, one little plugin can bump into another plugin and they have a little bit of crossover, and that just breaks the whole thing, and all your tracking is gone, or whatever it is. Like suddenly that will come crashing down, and you suddenly have, when you come to report, you have no idea how much money the website made over the last 3 weeks. Yeah,
exactly. It's like broken. If you can see the URL that you're to say, if you're like, you've just released 10 pages of new content and they are in the log files and they are being crawled regularly, all good, cool. I've seen instances where sites have been indexed, it's all great, but there's certain sections of the site not being crawled regularly. So it's like, you might think, oh, the news section's fine because it's been indexed. But actually, turns out that the news section is hosted on a different server, which is pulled through by your website. And actually, Google can't see that properly. And Google's like, this is all just blank content. But it might have been indexed previously. Like, it could have been, say, if there was content there previously and it's been indexed and now it's been edited. Well, I can see it if I type site and the URL, I can see that it's been indexed, so it's perfectly fine. And I can also see in my Google search console that it's been indexed and it's in the sitemap, so that's all good. It must be fine. But Google isn't looking at it regularly, and you don't know unless you look in the log files. And I mean, there are ways of looking that in Google search console, but it's quite limited. Google has very limited amount of information it shows you. If you have 10 pages of content and you want to know if Google is crawling them regularly, you can't find that out in Google search console simply. Google's quite stingy with the data that it shows you. It's like, we're not getting into APIs and stuff. We're trying to keep this kind of, but 1,000 URLs, and then that's kind of it. The rest of the information is lost into the void forever. So I really feel like people who create any sort of content or make any changes to a website need to understand what Google and other bots are seeing, because obviously you see, I've seen a lot of people have conversations, and even just personal conversations with people saying Google's just gone a bit funny. There's just like, there's just a lot of changes, and it doesn't show me the results that I want. And things like Bing, they're doing incentives for searching, so like Microsoft rewards and things like
Yep,
that.
yep.
So I actually do think, especially young people, are looking at other search engines because they don't have that connection with Google that
Mm.
perhaps older people might do. Like older people are just like, yeah, Google are just like, they are the internet. But younger people don't have that. And I think there's this conversation about like TikTok being a search
Oh
engine.
god, yeah, yeah, yep.
But you got to admit, like, if I want to look for a video to do makeup, like, I don't do it on Google. I look on TikTok, I look on YouTube. How to dye my hair in a certain way. This was on YouTube. Like, I was looking it up on YouTube, how to do my hair like this. I wasn't looking on Google because I was like, I don't know what Google's going to show me. It can show me a video, it can show me a TikTok, it can show me an image, it can show me everything. I know what I'm getting if I go with YouTube. I'm getting a video, and that's exactly what I want. But Google forces videos onto me. I was trying to look up something the other day, really simple, like how to access like I was configuring like Apple shortcuts on my phone, how to like configure a specific shortcut, and I just wanted step-by-step instructions. And Google was just showing me videos. It's like, I do not want videos. They were pushing videos onto me. If I wanted videos, I would say videos. So I think, yeah, as I think Google is maybe losing a bit of that audience that
Mm.
they thought they would have forever. And it's really interesting to see other search engines maybe gain a bit more traction. So that's why also log files are important, because you want to be seeing how other bots see your website.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. There is that. Almost, we were talking about the generational thing earlier. Like, I remember the days before Google of Ask Jeeves and other Yahoo and all that kind of stuff. But there is that kind of sweet spot where Google has just been. It is the verb in the same way that Hoover is a word for vacuum now, despite that being a brand name. America's used Kleenex instead of tissues, all this kind of stuff. Like, there's those certain brand names that, oh, just Google that. Nobody says, I'm going to search for that on my browser. Literally no one has ever said that in the last like 15 years, because I'll Google that is just synonymous with that action, right? And I love the discussion there of like how the log files can be relevant to how other things, and we mentioned apps earlier, you mentioned social sites like TikTok and Twitter and various other things that are understanding how your content is being understood by other sites and other sources. Maybe if you're pitching for an international audience and you're looking at Baidu or the recently purchased Yandex or whatever it is, like, there are so many other options there to just see how bots and crawlers and how what I found really interesting. So I didn't do it on a client site. This was all kind of pre-done for me, but it was like the introduction to log file analysis after that conversation I had with Steve at Brighton SEO, was the looking at how the frequency of different bots and how different bots crawl the site in different ways. So there was a certain thing where, if I remember, this is going back like 3 years now, I'm trying to remember, Google rendered the JavaScript much quicker than Bing did, and we specifically used the example of the main navigation uses a lot of JavaScript to literally like test this stuff out, right, and literally have that as an option. Be like, okay, that's a terrible idea, but how is the search bot reacting to this? And Bing does not like it at all, and it took like 8 weeks, 12 weeks, something like that, to catch up on itself. And Google, credit to Google, which is not something we say very often on this show, that they caught up really quickly and have gotten much better at catching up when actual crawl and indexing and rendering is actually much closer together now than it was a couple of years ago. And having that process of like, yeah, if you're putting this content out on another search engine, it needs to be actually crawlable and indexable by all these different search engines. And for me, that's often like the fundamental thing for technical SEO is your website indexable? Is your website crawlable? Like, all the other stuff is cool. Is it quick? Does it load? All this kind of stuff, but can the thing, and users more importantly, find the information on your website that you have put on your website? And you're totally right. Same goes for stuff like TikTok. I totally agree with you. I can't remember the search I did the other day, but I had the exact same experience where I was looking to do a thing and I wanted a how-to guide or whatever it was. And it was just 3 YouTube videos in a row. And I was like, I don't want YouTube videos. I want to see a diagram of how this stuff works.
Yeah.
I was changing a fuse thing because not important for the podcast, but my dishwasher's broken currently, and it's been around for 2 months, and it short circuited my entire downstairs the other day, and I own this house now, which is terrifying. So I
Yeah.
have to deal with this stuff, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And there was like all these various electrician people talking about how it all works and stuff, but there was no actual like this wire goes here and this like do not plug the
Yeah.
brown wire into the thing. I'm like, okay, good. And yeah, it was just serving me up constant video content. And I know the SERPs are still chaos with all the Reddit stuff that's been going on recently as well. That's a whole other discussion for another podcast. But I think you're totally right. Having that kind of like fundamental understanding of like where your content is going. I was just having a conversation with our account managers earlier today about indexed videos on your content and how that works. So if you say you create a video version, you create a how-to guide, keeping with that example, and you also do a YouTube video to go with that, does indexing that get slowed down by if you embed that YouTube video on there? Is there any positives or negatives to that and all this like wider discussion stuff? And you can see that kind of stuff, and you have a look at your crawl analysis and have a look at like,
Absolutely.
oh, is that kind of stuff actually affecting, the fact that you could go back to a previous page and update it, and oh, we've now done a video version. Did that suddenly get crawled? How quickly did that pull through? You can do little tests and experiments, and so much of for me of my learning in tech SEO was just testing and experimenting stuff, right? Have a little test site or two or whatever it is. Don't test on clients without their permission. I hasten to add. I know people have done that. But yeah, having a little like test bed to just poke and prod and see how long it takes, I find is really, really useful for me. To kind of wrap things up, is there any like last little bits of recommendations you'd make for if somebody's looking to get into tech SEO? They've got your book recommendations, they've got your go and have a look and understand the internet fundamentally. Like, what's the kind of next step for getting into tech SEO and kind of understanding it?
Yeah. So I think when I started in technical SEO, I was quite intimidated by what people around me were doing. I follow a lot of people on LinkedIn, and I kind of see all the stuff that they're coming out with, all the like code, and we've just done all this and wonderful. Obviously, I don't come from a technical background like a lot of SEOs do. So a lot of SEOs, they might have been previously developers or they've been working in the industry for many years, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many years you've been working in the industry. It doesn't matter even how many audits you've done. What are your results and what is your value to your clients? So when I started to look at it in that way, like what specifically am I trying to achieve for the client, instead of being like, oh, I need to know all the technical SEO things ever because, I want to be the best technical SEO. Look at it as in what's the specific results that I want for the clients.
Yeah.
And also making sure that, again, peer reviewing, getting people involved who are not in the tech team. So you're not kind of like zooming in on like just very technical issues, when you said about the title tags, exactly. Like sometimes in tech, we're just like, oh, title tags, like, yeah, but like hreflang and JavaScript and all these very technical things. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's title tags are your priority. So yeah, that's really, really important to make sure that you have people around you keeping you accountable.
Awesome. I think keeping you accountable is a very good way of thinking about it as well.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's not literally your manager, just that peer review thing for me has been such a good process. So I hope that's a really nice thing for you to take away, listeners and viewers. If you haven't already got that process, whether you're, co-working with people or you're in a big agency or in a little agency or in-house, whatever it is, there's options there to get people involved and have better different understandings and different perspectives, and non-tech people come in to understand that sort of stuff. And like you said, keep you accountable and make sure, like, did you do the basics? And like I said, I will hold my hands up on this show all day long. I will confess my guilt and confess my sins, because I was totally guilty of that a few years ago. Like, I completely forgot to look at titles. I've got them in front of me. I've done a crawl. There's no excuse. I was just so focused on this. I knew this was an issue, and I just focused on that thing. So I think it's a really, really good lesson to kind of leave the listeners and viewers with. So if people do want to follow, you mentioned following on LinkedIn there, Beth. How can people keep up with you, attend your Brighton SEO talk, and keep up with all your cool stuff you're doing on social media?
Yeah, so I have LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I do have a Twitter, which is Beth Woodcock. I don't go on it that much, but if people prefer to go on it, then that's great. That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's how you keep in touch.
I think that is the universal message from every guest I ask. That's like the question I ask at the end of every podcast. Is like, how can people follow you? And everybody goes, I have a Twitter. I don't really use it anymore. That seems to be like all the cool SEO stuff is happening on LinkedIn now. So
absolutely, yeah.
Let's go on LinkedIn, folks. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Beth. It's been a real pleasure to sit down and pick your brains about tech SEO and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, great to speak to you.
And that wraps up this week's episode of Search with Candour. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Had a lot of fun chatting with Beth and talking about technical SEO, getting some book recommendations that I now need to go and read, as if my to-read pile isn't big enough already. It is very big, unfortunately, but I need to start adding more marketing books and more ideas and philosophy books and stuff to it, apparently, on top of all the sci-fi and fantasy that is already there. For those of you interested, I'm currently reading The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, and it's melting my brain every 50 pages or so. So there's a science fiction / fantasy recommendation if you are interested in that. In the meantime, of course, I'll be back next week with the one and only Mark Williams-Cook. We'll be doing a monthly SEO recap for everything throughout March. We're going to be talking a lot about the Google antitrust trial debrief stuff. I know we've covered that before. I think this might be the last time we'll talk about it, because it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving, is the antitrust trial. And we'll also be talking about the recent AI Act from the European Commission and how that is going to affect a lot of the AI stuff going forward, and how that lays the foundation and groundwork for a lot of legislation that will very likely affect a lot of the AI uses in our everyday lives going forward as well. And of course, we don't just talk about AI and stuff. That ties it all back around and how it will affect search as well. So stay tuned for that next week. Of course, I have a lot of fantastic guests and interviews coming up throughout April as well. So please do stay tuned over the next few weeks and months and the rest of season 3 throughout 2024, right? It's going to be a fantastic year for Search with Candour. I'm really, really excited to have a conversation and pick the brains of so many of the interesting guests I've got lined up for you. So please do stay tuned for that. And until next week, have a lovely week.